Imagine your bank account. The number looks the same, but every day, its power shrinks. This isn't the fault of the stock market or a political scandal. It is a hidden tax. A deliberate, centuries-old mechanism designed to bleed you dry without you ever seeing the wound. History doesn't just rhyme. It repeats with brutal precision. There is a predictable four-stage process that signals the end of every great financial system, documented across civilizations from Rome to Britain to the Netherlands. Ray Dalio calls this the big cycle of empires, a pattern so consistent it appears as an economic law of nature. Today, the facts are undeniable. The evidence shows we have entered the fourth and final stage, collapse. This video will expose the timeless pattern, stage by stage, proving why the danger isn't coming. It's already here. The four-stage pattern governing every currency empire is as old as civilization itself. Yet it remains invisible to those who live within its grip. Ray Dalio's comprehensive analysis of the changing world order documents this cycle across Dutch, British, and American empires with striking consistency. First comes expansion, a period where empires find new sources of growth through territorial conquest, innovative trade routes, technological breakthroughs, or resource exploitation. Prosperity floods in like a river breaking through barriers. Confidence rises to intoxicating levels, and financial institutions seem absolutely untouchable. In this golden stage, money itself grows in importance as the ultimate measure of trust between strangers, nations, and generations. The second stage is over-indebtedness, the insidious accumulation of promises that cannot possibly be fulfilled by any reasonable standard of mathematics or economics. Governments borrow heavily to fund wars and infrastructure projects. Families mortgage their futures for immediate comfort. Businesses leverage themselves into dangerous territory, all convinced the boom will continue indefinitely. Historical records from the Dutch Republic show how accumulated debt began strangling their economy by the late 17th century. The third stage is currency debasement, the hidden tax inflicted by authorities desperate to postpone the day of reckoning. Gold coins are mixed with cheaper base metals, paper notes become progressively easier to print in unlimited quantities, central banks flex their theoretical power to systematically dilute the real purchasing value of savings accumulated over lifetimes. Public confidence begins to turn fragile, then brittle. Finally comes stage 4. Collapse. Trust in institutions evaporates. Panic follows. The accumulated purchasing power of a lifetime is destroyed. The historical lesson is not a suggestion. It is an iron law confirmed by Dalio's research. When a government chooses to debase its currency to postpone pain, the final collapse becomes both inevitable and exponentially faster. The Dutch guilder stands as one of history's most instructive examples, once serving as the world's first reserve currency, while forging a global trading empire throughout the 17th century. The Dutch East India Company controlled trade routes from Asia to the Americas, their currency trusted from London to Jakarta, accounting for over one-third of all international transactions. But at this moment of apparent invincibility, mounting dependence on borrowed money and escalating costs of continuous warfare pushed political leaders toward a fatal decision. As documented in financial histories of the Dutch Republic, the seeds of decline were sown when wealthy Dutch savers began moving capital abroad into more attractive British investments, while debt service payments squeezed the treasury. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War from 1780 to 1784 delivered the final blow. The Dutch East India Company lost half its ships and access to key trade routes while heavily borrowing from the Bank of Amsterdam to survive. The resulting bankruptcy led to the collapse of Dutch debt, equities, and the guilder itself, relegating their once mighty currency to regional obscurity. But the Dutch were not the last great empire to fall into this trap. A century later, their greatest rival, sitting atop a global empire, would read from the exact same playbook, with even more devastating consequences for its citizens. The British pound sterling reigned supreme as the undisputed world reserve currency for nearly 2 centuries, funding expansion across continents and financing countless military campaigns. But mounting war debts and imperial overstretch eventually forced British leaders to abandon the gold standard on September 21, 1931, in the face of massive gold and capital outflows during the Great Depression. This decision to inflate their money supply and print currency without backing systematically erased both domestic savings and global trust. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire's silver denarius underwent an even more dramatic 5-century journey from nearly pure silver to completely worthless scrap. Emperor Nero initiated the first notable debasement around 64 AD, reducing silver content from approximately 3.9 grams to 3.4 grams to finance his lavish building projects. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, silver content had plummeted to around 50%. Historical records detail each desperate attempt by successive emperors to stretch insufficient resources through systematic coin debasement with base metals and escalating military expenditure. By the end of the 3rd century, the denarius contained only about 2% silver before being replaced entirely. In every single documented case throughout history, this pattern played out with absolutely chilling precision. Initial optimism and expansion, dangerous overreach and borrowing, systematic currency dilution, and finally, devastating financial collapse. Today, examining current conditions with historical perspective, the evidence overwhelmingly signals we are deep into stage 4 of the traditional collapse pattern. The world's dominant reserve currency, the United States dollar, is experiencing debt levels that have reached historic proportions relative to economic output. According to data from the Federal Reserve and Congressional Budget Office, United States government debt reached 124% of GDP in December 2024, approaching the all-time high of 130.4% recorded during the pandemic crisis of March 2021. To contextualize this figure, from 1940 through 2024, U.S. debt averaged only 66% of GDP, with a record low of 32% in 1981. The current debt-to-GDP ratio is nearly 4 times higher than the historical average, representing unprecedented peacetime leverage. This isn't a sudden shock, it's a structural decay. Modern inflation acts like a corrosive agent on the financial bedrock of society. Savings accounts, retirement funds, wages, all see their real-world value quietly neutralized. It's the difference between having enough to buy a house and 5 years later, that same amount only affording the down payment. Monetary authorities resort systematically to quantitative easing programs, unprecedented deficit spending policies, and money creation at a scale never before attempted by any civilization in recorded history. Loss of fundamental faith becomes increasingly visible through multiple warning signs: the desperate rush toward hard assets, record-breaking gold purchases by central banks worldwide representing the highest accumulation in decades, explosive real estate prices disconnected from wage growth, and the emergence of alternative currencies. Central banking institutions extend the current cycle through increasingly complex financial engineering. But historical analysis warns that each additional manipulation draws the entire system measurably closer to irreversible systemic collapse. From ancient Rome to modern America, economic breakdown is always presaged by 3 unmistakable warning signs that repeat across cultures and centuries: reckless accumulation of unpayable debt, relentless systematic currency debasement, and mass loss of public financial confidence. Most contemporary financial systems actively conceal this dangerous stage through technical jargon, blame shifting toward external factors, or temporary measures designed to maintain the illusion of stability. When money becomes artificially soft through government manipulation, genuine trust evaporates. The final stage of every financial system throughout history is not a gradual, slow erosion, but rather a sudden catastrophic break, a silent reset that inevitably punishes those who believed permanent stability was actually possible. The historical record reveals a clear pattern among those who preserved their wealth during currency collapse. They shared two traits: a deep skepticism of official solutions when the crisis originated from official policies, and a documented strategy of diversifying into tangible assets that could not be created by government decree. Adam Ferguson's seminal work, When Money Dies, provides meticulous documentation of the Weimar Republic hyperinflation crisis that destroyed Germany's currency in 1923. When the exchange rate reached $1 to 4,200 billion marks by December of that year, the German Republic was reduced to a barter economy. Expensive cigars, artworks, and jewels were routinely exchanged for staples such as bread. A cinema ticket could be bought for a lump of coal, and a bottle of paraffin for a silk shirt. Those individuals and families who trusted official government assurances and kept the entirety of their accumulated wealth in rapidly debasing currency systematically lost everything they had worked to build. Ferguson's research documents how people watched helplessly as their life savings disappeared and their loved ones starved, while those who had converted wealth into hard assets survived the destruction. During the Dutch financial collapse following the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, experienced merchants who had prudently diversified their holdings into foreign assets and international trade relationships managed to survive the currency destruction. During Britain's monetary crisis and abandonment of the gold standard in 1931, those prescient individuals who retained physical gold holdings or income-producing property successfully maintained their generational wealth intact through the devastating devaluation of sterling. Roman patrician families who systematically stored real value in the form of productive agricultural land, precious metals, and essential commodities escaped complete financial ruin during the 3rd century collapse, while ordinary families watching helplessly saw their denarius-denominated savings completely dissolved as silver content dropped below 2%. The survival pattern documented across 25 centuries of recorded human experience consistently shows that paper promises are systematically erased by monetary authorities during crisis periods. But legitimately hard assets with intrinsic utility consistently endure through every transition. The lesson, repeated without exception in every great historical crisis, from Rome to Weimar to Britain, remains that lasting multi-generational wealth consistently arises from personal discipline, healthy skepticism toward official narratives, and systematic protection against currency dilution. Never from blind faith in institutional stability, promises made by the same authorities whose policies created the crisis conditions. The meticulously preserved records of fallen empires testify with absolutely grim clarity across every continent and historical period. Systematic currency instability is always disguised by authorities as economic progress, beneficial stimulus, or necessary emergency measures. But examination of the evidence from Rome, the Netherlands, Britain, and beyond reveals it has always been the oldest confidence trick in the recorded book of human civilization. The government's perfectly hidden tax that systematically bleeds accumulated wealth invisibly from working families every single day. The four-stage pattern we have examined today is not mere academic speculation or theoretical possibility. It represents a documented cycle identified by researchers like Ray Dalio, who analyzed 500 years of empire rises and falls, written permanently across the historical record from the Roman Denarius debasement to the Dutch guilder collapse to Britain's forced abandonment of the gold standard. The mounting evidence we now see accumulating around us, sovereign debts at 124% of GDP compared to a 66% historical average, endless monetary experiments with untested consequences, systematic erosion of purchasing power documented in Federal Reserve data, signals beyond reasonable doubt that the current system has definitively crossed the line into the fourth and final stage. History is not a perfect blueprint, but it is a brutal teacher. To ignore its warnings is to bet your family's future against the recorded outcome of every fallen empire from ancient Rome to modern Britain. Stop trusting only official stories crafted by the same institutions whose policies created these conditions. Study the documented pattern with clear eyes. The historical record from Adam Ferguson's When Money Dies to Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order provides the roadmap. Protect your family's legacy by carefully remembering who historically survived these transitions and exactly how they accomplished their preservation of wealth through tangible assets when paper promises dissolved. History doesn't repeat with perfect precision, but if you choose to ignore its unmistakable warnings, it will crush you all the same. If this systematic analysis opened your perspective to previously hidden realities, subscribe to the Financial Archive to decode other dangerous patterns emerging from careful historical study. The answers you need for protection are buried in the documented past. The archives have shown us the pattern. The records have shown us the consequences. The only question left is, when the great financial reset occurs, which side of the ledger will your legacy be on?